into our Charter Road Hospitality Studios here at the Hampton Inn by the Oxford Conference Center. This is Hotty, Toddy, Hotline. I'm your host, Browning Stubbs, and before we get to today's show, we only got to thank all of our sponsors, our Charter Road Hospitality sponsors, the one right here, the Hampton Inn by the Oxford Conference Center. Also another Hampton Inn located at 110 Heritage Drive, and Holiday Inn Express located at 112 Heritage Drive, and one of the newest properties, Town Place Suites, located right by the Oxford Conference Center as well. Today we're going to have a great show talking about Ole Miss basketball. The Ole Miss basketball team, they played 2 games this past week, and they were both decided by 1 point. I'll tell you how many of those games that they won or how many that they lost. They were 2 great games, needless to say. Also, I want to talk about Ole Miss baseball. Ole Miss baseball started this weekend. The long-anticipated wait for the season has finally begun, and the Rebels hit the diamond this weekend with a 3-game series against William and Mary. And also later in the show, we're going to talk to Bob Kessler, who's the play-by-play announcer for the Tennessee Volunteers, and he'll have a lot to talk with me about later on because, well, Ole Miss just played Tennessee women's basketball, and coming up this week, Ole Miss will play the men's in men's basketball. So stay with us here on Hotty Toddy Hotline. And we're back on Hotty Toddy Hotline. We're going to start off the show today talking about Ole Miss men's basketball, and the Rebels. They've had quite the season. It's been a real roller coaster year for Andy Kennedy and his Ole Miss Rebels. They, of course, started out the season with questionable losses to Charleston Southern, TCU. Those were at home, but then once conference play started, they turned it around. They actually opened up conference going 2-3, but ever since then they went on a 6-game winning streak, and some of those wins came against quality opponents: Arkansas on the road, Florida, Texas A&M, Auburn. So some quality wins. This week was a heck of a week for Ole Miss, as they played a road game against Florida, which was last Thursday. They go into the swamp with really a target on their back, because Florida, they came into Oxford back on January 24th, lost a close 72-71 basketball game. And Florida, for the most part, really controlled this basketball game. They were up at halftime, for example, and then in the second half, it seemed like things were clicking very well for the Gators. But in that matchup, Florida was without their leading scorer, Michael Frazier. Frazier scored 27 points in the first game against Ole Miss, which was, I said, like back on January 24th. So they had to deal without the leading scorer, but Florida, they responded. Their big guys, Devin Robinson, Dorian Finney-Smith, really gave the Rebels a challenge. But in the second half, Ole Miss, they look to their guy who's been giving them production all season long, and that's Stephon Moody. Moody comes in, scores 18 points in the game. He's the only starter in double figures for Ole Miss. Made 4 of 7 3-pointers. And one of those 4 3-pointers came at the right time. With just 3 seconds left in the game, Moody drailed I want to say about a 28-footer. He was basically in an isolation play. Ole Miss down 61-59. Moody pulled up and he knocked it down to save the Rebels in that game, as Ole Miss would go on to win 62-61. Now that's the first time that the Ole Miss has beaten Florida, both at home and at Florida in the Andy Kennedy era. So that's great for the Ole Miss Rebels. And they then on Saturday they had to play another game against Arkansas. Arkansas, top 25 team. They came into that matchup number 24. And at Ole Miss, they had another target on their back as well, because Arkansas got demolished by the Rebels back on January 17th, 96-82. Ole Miss went into Arkansas's building, a very tough place to play over there in Fayetteville, and Ole Miss, they took it to them. Scored 96 points, which was their season high. But in this matchup, it was different. Really, Arkansas came out with the most energy in the first half. They got I would say an NBA prospect, a guy who possibly could be a lottery pick in this year's coming draft, Bobby Portis, and He's a big-time power forward for Arkansas, and he played fantastic for the Razorbacks. 23 points, 10 rebounds for the Razorbacks, and the first half, Ole Miss just really got nothing going. That they were down. They were down by 5 points going into halftime, but then Ole Miss second half, they came back and they rallied. They actually ended up taking a 4-point lead with just about 3 minutes remaining in the game. But down the stretch, Ole Miss could knock down the buckets. It was Michael Qualls for Arkansas made 2 huge shots in the last 3 minutes of the game. Ole Miss just had no answer for the Razorbacks. Down the stretch of the game, Stephon Moody made a big shot. But then, the last minute, it came down to, Ole Miss missed a key shot, but then Arkansas, with just about, there was 8 seconds left in that basketball game. Arkansas scored with, just on the very last play, and Ole Miss took it down. Jarvis Summers shot a floater, didn't make it. I mean, it was a heartbreaking loss for Ole Miss. Ole Miss, they really needed to win that basketball game, and it was tough. Arkansas, their forward Rashad Madden hit the 6-foot jump shot in the paint to beat Ole Miss last night. But yeah, if you had told me before the season, Ole Miss, Andy Kennedy, you're going to split with Arkansas, I would probably take that bet. No one expected Ole Miss to go into Fayetteville and just destroy Arkansas like they did. In Ole Miss, they've been a really inconsistent home team as well this season. For the most part, they played good on the road, but you know what? They lost 71-70 to a top 25 team in Arkansas. The loss isn't going to kill you when it comes to NCAA tournament standings, because you lost to a good team, and you still have a win on your resume against Arkansas. But on your resume, it's not going to say bad loss to Arkansas either. So, it was a good effort by Ole Miss and Andy Kennedy, and honestly, out of their remaining games prior to that game, I would say that was their toughest game, against Arkansas. Probably when we look ahead at their schedule now, they'll play at Mississippi State, and boy, the Bulldogs, they, after their road win against Missouri, they had some flight trouble and had to turn around and land in St. Louis in the middle of their flight because there was a problem with the engine. So glad that our friends in Starkville made it safely. But then Ole Miss, they'll also play Tennessee, and we'll talk with Bob Kessling coming up on the show later. And Georgia, that's another home game, and then 2 road games at LSU, at Alabama, and then close it out against Vanderbilt. So still a lot of basketball left to play. Ole Miss, I think despite the loss, they're still an NCAA tournament team, but they can't squander and then lose probably 2 of these next 6 games. There's potential for them to win all 6, and they really have to bring their A game in all these games. So coming up, we're gonna talk to Tennessee play-by-play broadcaster Bob Kessling, and he'll give us much more insight to Tennessee and their basketball teams, and we'll probably even chime in about their top 5 recruiting class. So don't go anywhere. Stay with us here on Toddy Hotline. And we're back on Toddy Hotline. He's not Bob Kessling,
No.
but he is our executive producer, John Raw. We had some miscommunication with Bob. I guess it's the weather's affecting the phone lines, right?
That's what happens, and that's when the executive producer has to step in and put a Band-Aid on. But Bob Kessling, of course, known as the voice of the Tennessee Vols, taking that job over from John Ward back in the late 90s. John Ward, of course, was their longtime play-by-play guy in Knoxville, and as far as I know, is still alive. He retired some 17, 18 years ago, but he a legend in that world. In fact, Browning, you'll appreciate this. I was living in Nashville back in those days, and he was such a popular play-by-play guy that when he retired, the great Tennessee fan Kenny Chesney came out with like a tribute song to John Ward that was released to country radio. So I don't know if you're the next John Ward or Bob Kessling, Browning, but you could be the next David Keller, who knows. But just a legend there that Bob Kessling took over. Now, I grew up watching Kessling, or I maybe was already grown, a little too young for you maybe, but back in those 90s, before he took over the Tennessee job. Kessling was known to many folks for what he did for what was called the Jefferson Pilot Television Network, where they would do what essentially is on the SEC network. They were doing the television broadcast for all the SEC schools, and Kessling was really the featured play-by-play guy. I guess Dave Neal took over that role when Kessling left to go to Knoxville to be the play-by-play guy. He's from that area. I think he was a sports anchor on one of the Knoxville TV stations, is kind of how that all materialized. But some great games back in the 90s that Kessling called with that Jefferson Pilot Network, and I know he's probably in that time period covered more Ole Miss Vanderbilt football games. You know, the kind of games that weren't going to be on the big time stage, but were still something that people wanted to watch. And usually, if you go back in the archives, for some crazy reason, that Ole Miss Vanderbilt game was always one of those early games that was on the TV syndicated network, because it was early enough in the season.
Yeah.
They could go ahead and we'll just get Ole Miss and Vanderbilt. They can't complain we didn't televise their game. We'll just go ahead and get them early in the season. But
they used to do weird times for those games. It'd be like 11:21 would be some of the start time.
It seems so long ago now, but I can't tell you how common it was just up until a couple of years ago. If you wanted to go tailgate, you'd have to be out there at 7 in the morning for those early JP games. And the worse your season was going, the more of those games you would have.
Right.
So Ole Miss, you can go back and look at the seasons they had, and they were on there a good bit. It was so amazing. This was the first year of the SEC network that essentially Ole Miss had a lot of mid to late afternoon games this year, not even late night games. I'm talking 4, 3:30, 5, somewhere in that ballpark. And those are perfect for folks like Charter Road Hospitality here in Oxford, because they get people to stay here 2 nights for the restaurants, and people like that. They get to get people certainly for one of the 2 meals, if not both of the meals, if they don't go to the Grove. So it's just an amazing change now with the SEC network. But Bob Kessling, I wish I were Bob Kessling sitting here talking to you, Browning, but I can't do anything about him picking up the phone whenever we've got bad weather throughout the South. And I know that's something that is affecting many of us here this week, and we hope that all of you watching and listening to Hotty Toddy Hotline are staying safe and everything works out well.
Yeah, and if you're driving this week, is what you're headed to?
I'm going to try to get out of here to Biloxi and visit some radio friends in South Mississippi, try to expand this show. Unfortunately, we aren't as heard in that part of Mississippi as I would like, and that's part of what I have to do as executive producer of this show and many other shows on the CRM Sports Network, is stay in touch with folks throughout the business. And there was a really interesting sports talk show, sports talk station that was all over the Gulf Coast of Mississippi for a couple of years, and they went off the air a few months ago. So there's really no sports talk station on the FM side of things, at least, all throughout the most populated portion of Mississippi. So maybe we can get, if you know some way to help us, Browning, if you want to help me go buy a radio station, we can bring this show on to our Ole Miss fans on the coast.
Yeah. Let's do that, sure.
The check might bounce, but we'll still we'll try to make it happen. But yeah, I'll be there, and then I'm going to try to work my way over to the great state of Texas and do the same thing, visit radio stations, because we have here at CRM Sports shows for most of the SEC schools, including a show for Texas A&M called the Maroon and White Report. We also have a Texas Longhorn show called Longhorn Blitz. And I have not been to places like Marshall, Texas, and Nacogdoches, Texas, which, do you know what's in Nacogdoches, Texas?
I'm going to say Cowboys, like some old Cowboys.
It's the home of Stephen F. Austin, which I know you follow college basketball. That is a team that's been pretty good. I think the Lumberjacks have won, 30 games or so last year?
Yeah, they went like 30-2.
I know they went to the tournament.
Yeah, they won a game in the tournament.
Did they? Okay.
I think they beat VCU.
Okay. So I'll be staying there in that town as well as College Station. So even though everybody around here will be hunkered down and trying to survive the weather, hopefully it won't be too bad for me. But I might need to go to Knoxville, Tennessee, and find Bob Kessling and find out why he didn't show up here on this interview. But the reason we were going to have him on is because the Tennessee Vols and the Rebels are getting together on the hard court this week. Maybe you can see him in person Saturday and say, hey, what happened?
Yeah, I'll have to do that. But Yeah, I mean, we were going to talk Ole Miss and Tennessee with Bob. Tennessee, they're a young team in basketball. They kind of surprised people. I don't think they're a tournament team, but they're certainly an NIT team.
They've got a new coach this year because Konzo
Donnie
Martin
Tyndall, yeah,
left to go to Cal,
California.
and so that was really a little bit of a surprise because
They just made the Sweet 16.
they did.
And then the Kwanzaa Martin had a falling out with the front office over at Tennessee, and it just it really didn't.
And Cal, I don't think is a basketball power, so not that Tennessee is that big of a power, but kind of a lateral move at best, going from Tennessee to Cal. But
I mean, it's not a. I mean, I thought it was a solid job to take because there's been some NBA players out of Cal, like Jason Kidd, for example, one of the best 50 players all time came out of Cal. So, and it's and he had no connection out there as far as family or friends. So I mean, from a recruiting aspect, that's going to be a challenge for Kwanzaa Martin.
that was a strange offseason move in the SEC as well as Missouri. Didn't their coach leave?
Yeah, Frank Haith, he was coaching Mizzou, and he ended up going to Tulsa.
Yeah.
So I don't know why you would go from an SEC program to a team in the American Athletic Conference. I mean, they paid him more, first of all, and then I mean you look at the talent on Missouri's team this year. They're one of the worst teams in the SEC.
They're the worst team, aren't they?
Yeah, they're the worst in conference right now. So how much better could Frank Haith have done with that team? Who knows? But he probably was going to get fired. And if he had coached one more year, he probably would have been fired.
Well, he's got baggage with what happened in Miami, right?
Yeah, and that's just carried over, to his rep as well. But he's doing well at Tulsa. They're in the top 2 or 3 in this American Athletic Conference this year.
And I know Ole Miss played their one of their great players from Tulsa was the head coach of Arkansas, Coach Anderson, right? Because Coach Richardson coached at Tulsa, I believe, before he went to Arkansas. And I tell you what, Anderson's got a good team this year. Arkansas, of course, knocking off Ole Miss by 1 point this past weekend in the basketball side of things. And do you think Arkansas has punched their ticket to the big dance?
Yeah, I mean they've only lost 5 games all season. They did a lot of work non-conference, and they'll have a chance to play Kentucky. It's at Rupp Arena, but I mean certainly they're clearly the second best team in the conference. So I think they'll have a chance. I don't know if they'll win. I mean I said it before the season that Kentucky would lose 1 game in conference play. Arkansas beat them twice last year. On a team that made the Final Four.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they beat them twice, so maybe they'll do it again this year. But I mean, when we look at SEC basketball, John, I mean it's improved. You got Kentucky, always good. Arkansas's good. LSU's solid this year. Georgia, Ole Miss. So there's certainly.
Ole Miss was not good. I mean, their preseason was really bad.
Yeah, but they've surprised a lot of us. I mean, despite the Arkansas loss, I think they're still a tournament team. But yeah, I mean, it's good to see the SEC really playing better because last year, I think only outside of Kentucky and Florida, Tennessee made it, and that might have been it. Just 3 teams, right?
I think so, but Browning, the SEC is making sure that everybody knows this is a basketball conference.
Exactly.
Forget football, and I don't mean that jokingly. It's been 3 years since an SEC team won a national championship.
Yeah. Well,
And
they're
Florida
trying to
State and
turn
Ohio State, and for a conference that had 7 straight, it's now been 3 years. And just think about that one for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the reign of dominance is over.
I didn't say that, but
Right.
a lot of people equated the SEC because of all the championships. Well, it's not just been 1 year; it hadn't been 2. It's now been 3 years since they were the national champion on the football side of things.
Yeah, and it wasn't that long ago where you could argue the SEC was the best basketball conference. It was back in 2006. You had Florida and LSU were in the Final Four when LSU had big baby Glenn Davis, and then Kentucky was good then too. So there was an argument that the SEC was one of the best conferences then too in basketball. But that's good to see that it's on the upward spiral.
And it helps on the basketball side when you've got conferences like the ACC, not necessarily down, but they're beating each other up. And
Right.
we see teams, Pitt beat North Carolina or somebody like that this
Yeah.
weekend. And you don't have these ACC teams that we're used to hearing all the time just constantly winning. They do lose their share of games now, and that's because those conferences have improved their number of teams in the conference, and that kind of balances thing out for conferences like the Southeastern Conference.
Yeah, well, certainly it's going to be a great finish to the college basketball season. Should be some fun March Madness with the SEC teams, and Hotty Hotline will keep you guys up to date on all that. Well, John, thanks for
Just call me Bob Kessler.
But hey, Bob Kessling, Bob Kessling Rawl.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go.
BKR.
All right. Well, we're gonna go to a break, and coming up, we'll talk some more Ole Miss sports here on Hotty Hotline. And we're back on Hotty Hotline, and I promised you guys we'd talk some Ole Miss baseball, and that's what we're gonna do. The Rebels, they finally opened the 2015 season over this past weekend as they hosted a 3-game series with William and Mary College. And the Rebels, they come into the season ranked number 18 in the polls, and it's kind of weird. They were projected to finish 6th in the SEC West. So when they're a top 25 team and they're ranked, they're ranked to finish 6th in their division. That's kind of odd, but that shows you just how good the SEC is. And just some other interesting news. Sykes Orvis, the Ole Miss first baseman, he was actually named to the first team All SEC preseason team. So that's great for Sykes Orvis. And he was great last year. He had 14 home runs, hit 294, 53 RBIs. So that's a good returning player. Probably the best guy that's returning for Ole Miss this season. But we look at the stats against William and Mary. Ole Miss didn't sweep William and Mary. I was very surprised to find that out. They only took 2 or 3 from the Tribe. They won the first one 9-4, and that was a really good game for Ole Miss as Coach Mike Bianco improved to 14-1 in season openers, and the player of the game for Ole Miss was Kyle Watson. Kyle had 2 hits and 2 RBIs for Ole Miss in that one, and it was a really fun atmosphere at Swayze Field. And Christian Trent took the mound for Ole Miss, and he picked up the win. Now he's 10-0 for his career now as an Ole Miss Rebel. With Christian Trent only allowed 1 run. He gave up 6 hits and 1 walk and 1 strikeouts, and that was all in 5 innings of work. So that was a great atmosphere for Christian Trent. But in the second game, kind of a shocker as Ole Miss lost to William and Mary. They lost 8-1 in that matchup. And Sam Smith, a guy who Ole Miss is expecting to count on, did not have his best game as he gave up 4 runs on 4 hits with 3 walks and only had 1 strikeout in 3 innings of work. And the William Mary, they took a 1-0 lead in the second inning with an RBI double down right field, and after that it was just all downhill for Ole Miss as they really couldn't get anything going. So they dropped that one, but then Ole Miss took that one to heart, and I'm sure Mike Bianco said something to his team, because in the third game, which there was a doubleheader Saturday, Ole Miss they just came out of nowhere to score 16 runs as Ole Miss won that one 16-2. Earl Robinson, the infielder, had 4 hits for the Rebels, scored 3 runs and 3 RBIs. So that was big time baseball for Earl Robinson. Earl Robinson really came to play in that one for sure, and it was actually a career game for Earl Robinson as total in the game he hit 4 for 5. Also, Colby Bortles, the younger brother of Jaguars quarterback Blake Bortles, also played really well in this baseball game. As he went 3 for 5 with 2 runs, and he had 5 RBIs. So, and he actually had a 3-run home run in the 7th inning. So, I mean, that's really encouraging when you see guys like Colby Bortles and Holt Herzog. Those are a couple names that come to mind. Last year, they really didn't play as much, but they did make big plays in the journey to the College World Series. But now this year, those guys will be counted on big time to make big plays for Ole Miss. And Bortles, he came to play and played phenomenal in that one. And really, I mean, Ole Miss, they just pounded William & Mary in this third game. They scored in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th inning. Had 4 runs in the 7th inning. So I mean, Ole Miss really was playing really consistent baseball the entire game. So that's big for the Ole Miss Rebels as they're now 2-1 on the young season, and actually the reason why there was a doubleheader Saturday was because they were afraid that it was going to be inclement weather on Sunday, so the Sunday game got moved up to Saturday. Now Ole Miss, they'll play a game on Tuesday against Arkansas State here at Oxford, and then the following weekend or this coming weekend, shall I say, they'll have a 3-game home series with Wright State. So hopefully Ole Miss can get on the winning track and really stack up a lot of wins before they hit the road to take on Central Florida at the end of February. And there's been some changes, to how the attendance goes at Ole Miss. For some of our younger listeners, the right field at Swayze Field, it's been known to be I guess you could call it a party atmosphere where after there's a home run, the fans throw their beers in the air, and they call it a beer shower. But now they're going to be scanning every Ole Miss student's ID to find out how old they are exactly. So, if they scan your ID and you're 21, then you'll get a wristband where you'll be allowed to drink alcohol in right field. But if you're not 21, they'll scan your ID and you won't be able to get a wristband. So you won't be able to drink in right field. I think there was probably a fake ID issue, or and there was reports there were a couple of MIPs that were given out last year. So I guess they're just cracking down on the safety at Swayze Field, but nonetheless, should be a great baseball season coming up for Ole Miss. Well, that wraps up our baseball discussion. Coming up next, we're going to talk some Ole Miss women's basketball, and then we'll talk a few other things going on around Ole Miss sports. Stay with us here on Hotty Toddy Hotline. And we're back on Hotty Toddy Hotline. We'd like to thank all of our sponsors at Charter Road Hospitality. And they make this show possible, and we are actually at one of their properties broadcasting at the Hampton Inn over by the Oxford Conference Center. So thank all you guys for that. And now let's talk about one of our fans of the show, Matt Insel. Matt Insel is the Ole Miss women's basketball coach, and his Lady Rebs, they're kind of going downhill. I hate to put it that way, but ever since starting 4-1 in the SEC play this season, it hasn't been good for his squad. There's kind of been some memories to last year's team, I would probably say. The team that only won 2 conference games, but I said they started out 4-1, and then they had a chance against Mississippi State, lost that one by 2 points on a game-winning shot with just a few seconds left. Ever since that game, Ole Miss, they just I don't know what happened to them. I feel like there's they just kind of got their heart ripped out of them because that loss to State just was just terrible, and it really hurt them, and it's affected them. Then they go on the road and lose by 29 to LSU, and then they play a competitive first half against South Carolina, but end up losing that one by 18. Lose a close one to Vanderbilt, and now we're going to talk about the game where they really, I know they were playing Tennessee, the number 6 team in the nation at the time, but there really just wasn't a lot of grit, a lot of heart out there for Ole Miss in that one. I was covering that game, and I actually sat behind the bench for most of the game, and it was Matt Insel was subbing people, left and right out of the game, and he was really mad. He said after the game he was not pleased at all with his team's performance, and he's right, because Tennessee, they were just amazing. I mean, frankly, they shot 52%, out rebounded Ole Miss. Those Tennessee girls, I don't know if you guys watch them, but they're big. So that was a huge advantage for them. So they were throwing balls like over the top of people, and then they were executing. Tennessee was, and just the Ole Miss Rebels had no answer for Tennessee. They were out rebounded 46-29. Tennessee scored 69 points on 18 assists. In Ole Miss, they didn't shoot well from the free throw line either. They shot 55%. It's kind of the opposite of what the men's team, who shoots very well from the free throw line. But the reason why Ole Miss lost his basketball game, senior Tia Fowler, all SEC player, 0 points. That's right, goose egg, 0 points. When your best player doesn't show up and can't score, you're not going to win. She only took 3 shots. She was. There were times during the game she was just jogging back on the defense. She wasn't running the floor hard enough, and it was just not a good effort at all for Ole Miss. Not one player scored in double figures. The leading scorer in this game was Chandrika Sessom, who had 9 points for Ole Miss. I guess the best player was Gracie Frizzell. She brings it every night. She came in off the bench to score 9 points off 3 3-pointers for Ole Miss. So she played very well. But Matt was. He's very frustrated by his point guard play with Erica Sisk and Queen Hayes. He was subbing them in and out a lot, and he was yelling at Tia for not bringing it on both ends of the floor. So in Danielle McRae in this game, she shot 4 of 12, 8 points, but it's almost like she's strong when she takes it inside and draws contact, but she was forced to. She just shot a bunch of step back jump shots in this basketball game. I don't know if she was just scared to take it against the bigs of Tennessee, but she had golden opportunities to make plays, and she didn't. She just settled for a bunch of jump shots. So Ole Miss, they picked up their 7th loss in the SEC play after that one, and that was not a good effort for Ole Miss, because the year before that they played a very good game against Tennessee. They played them twice, but then the one that was in Oxford, I'm looking at it right now, they lost 77-65, but that was actually a closer game than everyone thought, because they were actually in that game to the very end. But the Ole Miss Rebels, they now, I would say the NCAA tournament talks are over for them, but they still have a chance to make an NIT bid, but they're going to have to somehow create some wins down the stretch. They're they play Missouri, and they'll play Auburn. Auburn's a team that Ole Miss they beat last year, but Auburn is a team Ole Miss has got to beat. They are 9-15 overall and 0-11 in SEC play. So just beat Auburn. That's all I got to say. They've got to beat the Auburn Tigers. Then they have a home game against LSU, who smacked them the first time, and then Ole Miss will go at Mississippi State Sunday, March 1st. I would say, Vic Schaefer's club, they're big, they're good, but Ole Miss played them very well. So it's certainly a winnable game. And then I forgot to mention on the 23rd, Matthew Mitchell, who was the head coach at Kentucky. His Wildcats come to town. Matt Ensel was the lead assistant under Matthew Mitchell at Kentucky for several years there. So that's basically that's what's ahead for the Ole Miss women's basketball team. So they're going to have to beat Auburn, to have their 5th win in conference play, and then they're going to have to possibly win one more game in the SEC tournament if they want to make the NIT. I mean, to make the NIT, I know it's not what you want, but from a program that was nowhere near postseason talks, that would be huge for them if they could make the NIT. All right, well, that wraps up our women's basketball discussion. We're going to come back and talk about a few other Ole Miss sports and whatever you guys have tweeted at us this week. So stay with us here on Hotty Toddy Hotline. Welcome back to Hotty Toddy Hotline. This is our final segment of the show for this week, and right now we're going to once again thank our sponsors for making Hotty Toddy Hotline happen, and it all starts with our Charter Road hospitality properties. We'd like to thank the Hampton Inn right here by the Oxford Conference Center, located at 103 Ed Perry Boulevard. Their phone number, if you're in town for a baseball series, a basketball game, it's a great place to stay. Their phone number is 662-234-5535. Also, a place that's right down the block from here is Town Place Suites. It's a Marriott property, and their number is 662-238-3522. Their address is 105 Ed Perry Boulevard. And also, there's a couple other properties, kind of near Jackson Avenue that you guys should check out. There's Hampton Inn, 110 Heritage Drive. Their number is 662-232-2442. And also, Holiday Inn Express. Their address is 112 Heritage Drive, and their phone number is 662-236-2500. So if you're in town, I mean, all these, I've been inside all of them. I've stayed at 3 of the 4 actually. I haven't stayed at Town Place because that's like the newer one that is just opened. But they're great, comfortable places to stay at, and if you're in town for baseball series or anything, just please check it out. They're awesome. All right, now let's wrap up the show talking about what to expect this week from Ole Miss sports. One thing we haven't talked about was softball. The Ole Miss softball team, they started playing, at the beginning of the month, and they're 6-4 so far on the season, and they won't be in action until this next coming weekend on the 20th, as they'll play in the Red and Blue Classic. So that they'll have they have four games in one day. That's crazy. Their first game's at 11:15 a.m. That'll be this coming Friday on the 20th. So that's Ole Miss softball, and then some other things going on right now is the men's tennis team. Nick Schultz, he returns for his senior year. They have an event. They actually just lost to Duke, who is one of the top rated teams in the nation. They're actually ranked number 6 in the country. Ole Miss is ranked 19th, but they'll return back to action next week as they'll play Jackson State on the 24th. In Oxford. And then some big basketball games coming up this week. The Ole Miss men's basketball team, it's rivalry week for them as they'll take on the Mississippi State Bulldogs this Thursday. That one's in Starkville. So it's only about an hour and a half drive if you guys want to check that one out. It's an 8 p.m. Central tip at the Hump, I believe is what Mississippi State calls their basketball stadium. Then Saturday, they'll play the Tennessee Volunteers, so that's a big one you don't want to miss as well. And then the Ole Miss women's basketball team, they won't be in action until they'll play at Auburn, and that one will be on Thursday. But then they won't have a home game until a week from now, on the 23rd against Kentucky. So there's And then the Ole Miss baseball team, I mentioned earlier, but they'll have a weekend series coming up against Wright State that you guys don't want to miss. So there's a lot of Ole Miss sports coming up. Ole Miss basketball. Go watch that team play. They're playing really good ball right now, even though they just lost to Arkansas. But they'll probably be an NCAA tournament team. So I mean that'd be big if Ole Miss could get some fans in Nashville for the SEC tournament and wherever they play in the NCAA. So that'd be cool. And then Ole Miss baseball, they're just now starting. So there's a lot of hype around the Ole Miss community for these two teams. Well, that's gonna do it for this week's Hotty Toddy Hotline. It was a pleasure talking about everything Ole Miss with you guys, and get connected with us on Facebook, Hotty Toddy Hotline. Shoot us a like, and on Twitter, follow us at Hotty Toddy Hotline, and we would love to talk to you guys and get you involved in the show. Well, that's it for me. I'm Browning Stubbs. I'll see you guys next week.